The silence was the first surprise. Ilara had imagined the roar of the wind, the constant slap of waves against the hull. But out here, 1,000 nautical miles from anywhere, the world had been muted. The Pacific was a vast, black mirror, perfectly still, reflecting a sky dense with stars she'd never seen before. Her 40-foot sloop, the Wayfinder, drifted in a breathless calm, its sails hanging limp as ghosts. It was the third day of the calm. Her satellite phone had died on the first, a sudden, silent death that felt less like a malfunction and more like a switch being thrown. The engine, her last resort, had coughed a final, oily breath yesterday. She was adrift in the most empty quarter of the planet, a dot on an infinite sheet of black glass. Ilara sat in the cockpit, a thermos of cold coffee in her hand, trying to ignore the creeping sensation that the horizon was slowly closing in. She was a seasoned sailor, she knew the dangers of solitude. But this was different. This felt less like being alone and more like being watched. The first sound made her jump so violently she spilled the coffee. It was a soft, wet thump against the port side. Whale, she thought, her heart hammering. Or a large piece of debris. She scanned the water, but the blackness yielded nothing. The silence rushed back in, thicker than before. 10 minutes passed. Then, another thump. This one was closer to the stern. It was followed by a slow, dragging sound, like something heavy and rough was being pulled along the fiberglass hull below the waterline. Grabbing the high-powered spotlight, she leaned over the gunwale, sweeping the beam across the water. The light pierced the inky blackness, revealing only her own reflection, pale and wide-eyed, and the endless deep beneath. Nothing. She was turning away when she saw it. A flicker of movement in the reflection. Not in the water, but behind her reflection, in the mirrored image of the boat's deck. A shape, pale and long, slipping out of sight behind the mast. Ilara spun around, the spotlight cutting a frantic path across the empty deck. There was nothing there. The boat was exactly as she'd left it. But the primal part of her brain, the part that hadn't been civilized by charts and GPS, was screaming. Something was on the boat. She descended the companionway into the cabin, locking the hatch behind her. The familiar space, once her sanctuary, now felt like a trap. The gentle rocking of the boat, once a comfort, felt like the swaying of a cage. She sat on her bunk, clutching a filleting knife, listening. For an hour, there was only the sound of her own breathing. Then, a new sound began. A faint, rhythmic tapping. It was coming from the keel, the very spine of the boat. Tap. 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 Like someone or something was knocking politely from underneath. Terror curdled into a cold, hard dread. This wasn't a whale. This was intelligence. A patient, dreadful intelligence. The tapping stopped. A new sound replaced it, a soft, slithering wetness on the deck above her head. It moved from the bow to the stern, pausing directly over the hatch. Ilara looked up, her eyes fixed on the locked plexiglass. A dark, viscous liquid began to seep through the edges of the hatch, dripping onto the cabin floor. It wasn't water. It was thick, and smelled of salt and deep, deep decay. Then, a voice. It was a wretched imitation of a human voice, raspy and waterlogged, as if forced through a corrupted filter. It didn't come from outside. It seemed to emanate from the very bones of the boat, vibrating up through the floorboards. Alone. Ilara clamped a hand over her mouth to stop from screaming. The voice came again, a whisper that was everywhere at once. You are not alone. Something scraped against the hull, a sound of immense weight shifting. The boat listed slightly. The thing was climbing aboard. The slithering on the deck became more pronounced, a heavy, dragging weight. Driven by a final, desperate hope, Ilara scrambled for the VHF radio. It was a long shot, but it ran on its own battery. She keyed the mic, her voice a trembling sob. Mayday, mayday, mayday. This is sailing vessel the Wayfinder. I am adrift, my position is unknown. There is something on board. There is something. A deafening crash came from the hatch. The plexiglass splintered inward. A long, pallid limb, slick and featureless, tipped with something that was neither hand nor claw, slithered through the broken pane and fumbled with the lock from the inside. Ilara dropped the mic, backing into the farthest corner of the cabin. The hatch swung open. Silence returned. The slithering had stopped. The only sound was the frantic, broken plea of her own voice repeating from the VHF speaker, a ghost of her desperation echoing back at her. "Something on board, there is something." From the dark rectangle of the open hatch, a shape began to descend. It was slow, deliberate. It blotted out the stars. Ilara's last thought was not of monsters or the deep, but of the silence. She finally understood. It wasn't the absence of sound. It was the presence of something that had been listening all along. And now, its patience had ended. The VHF speaker crackled one last time, emitting a wet, gurgling sigh before falling silent forever. On the vast, black mirror of the sea, the Wayfinder drifted on, its sails still limp. Not empty anymore, but no longer broadcasting a plea for help. It was just another dark shape, moving slowly with the current, swallowed by the immense and ancient quiet.